Welcome to Breaking with Tradition, a new Catalyst podcast where we follow in the footsteps of our founder, Felice Schwartz, and sit down with change-making leaders and professionals accelerating diversity, equity, and inclusion in today's global workplace.
Founded in 1962, Catalyst drives change with unparalleled thought leadership, actionable solutions, and a galvanized community of multinational corporations to accelerate and advance women into leadership. Because progress for women is progress for everyone. We're your hosts. My name is Lucy Callan.
I'm Victoria Cuquetz.
And I'm Erin Souza-Rezendes. And we're three Catalystas that live in different regions around the globe. We're united by one goal: to create workplaces where anyone can thrive, regardless of their identity.
Hello, I'm your host, Erin Souza-Rezendes. Today, I'm chatting with Dani Gomez-Ortega, Senior Manager, Global Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at McCain Foods and Transgender Inclusion Advocate, and Mark Greene, Workplace Inclusion Coach and Consultant and host of the podcast Remaking Manhood. We're going to talk about how we frame gender in the workplace, a complex and vast topic that hopefully we can break down for folks in a short conversation. And of course, this is a starting point. What does gender equity mean to each of you?
I think for me, gender equity is about recognizing all genders and all the versions of gender and the shades of gender and the compositions of gender that are out there. You know, when we talk about gender equities, it can't just be about women. It's also about men, but also about all the other genders that exist in the world, you know? So in a global context, in North America, we have non-binary people. We have people that identify as two-spirit. You know, when we talk about India, we talk about the Hijra people. When we talk about Mexico, we talked about the Musha people. And so we need to start recognizing that gender goes beyond women, and it even goes beyond men and women. As an aside, if you do want, you know, your gender equity work to just focus on women, fantastic, you know, keep up that work. And also recognize that women is not just one monolith, right? There are transgender women, Black women, disabled women. There are transgender Black disabled women. So it's really, really important that if you do want to focus on the inclusion of women in the workplace, focus on that, but make sure that it includes all women, not just the majority of women, which are typically cisgender, able-bodied, white, etc.
Well, let me begin by saying that as a apparently white cisgender man in this conversation, I am always mindful of the fact that I have learning to do about how to speak in ways that don't unintentionally cause harm. So if I say anything here, Dani, that you need to help me better understand, just let me know. That being said, I think one of the things that men in a gender binary construct face is catastrophic levels of social isolation and loss of authentic expression in the world because of the gender binary construction of masculinity, which is sometimes referred to as man box culture. And when we talk about a generations old hierarchical, dominance-based, bullying, policing construct of masculinity, which includes rules like don't show your emotions, be a breadwinner, not a caregiver, be tough, never ask for help. If you're going to talk to other men, talk about cars or sports, nothing deep, be heterosexual, never homosexual. And this last one, have control over women and girls. When you talk about a construct of masculinity like that, the damage it does to men is significant, along with all those whose lives we impact. So if we're talking about gender in the workplace, we are talking about providing true equity and opportunity across the gender spectrum, but we're also in that moment liberating men from a performance of masculinity, which leads to deep social isolation, violence, drug addiction, early mortality, all of the things that come out of a world where men can't actually show up as who we really are.
Certainly gender norms and expectations around how we all perform gender have they've shifted over time. Perhaps we could use the word evolved, although evolved to me signals, forward movement, positive progression. That may or may not be true, but I do think that we've certainly seen shifts in gender norms and expectations around the performance of that. How have you seen that show up? And how have we seen or not seen those shifts reflected in the workplace?
I've been in this deconstruction of the whole binary riddled conversation about masculinity for nearly 2 decades now, writing and speaking on this stuff. And I think one of the evolutions that I'm seeing happen in a very real way right now in the way that we talk about men and masculinity is that 10, 15 years ago, if you said, hey, we need a group inside organizations for men so men can have these conversations they need to have, the response typically was, hey, there's not enough resources for women or people of color or LGBTQI people. We can't be putting money toward men. They are already in control of everything. They're already at the top of the hierarchy. Lately, it has become evident that if we don't make space for conversations among men about men, men will continue to fall prey to the single primary purpose of man box culture, which is to keep us silent and keep us conforming without ever checking in with each other about where did we learn these ideas about dominance-based masculinity? Where did we learn these ideas about women or the workplace or anything else? So I've seen that evolution take place where now people of color, women, trans folks, everybody's looking at men and saying, maybe those folks do need to be having the conversation in their cohort as well.
You sparked a reminder of a data point for me, which we know from Catalyst's own research and work in the space to really invite men and folks of all genders into the work of gender equity, warmly invite with care and concern for their experiences into this discussion. And we know that more than 90% of men say, I want to be part of this work and the solution and help to drive gender equity in the workplace. And it's also true the majority say, I don't know how to do that. Right. And so what you're talking about, Mark, this sort of, inclusion of men, this invitation to men and folks of all genders to be part of this, maybe we need to kind of double down on that and do so in a way that signals it's okay if you don't know what to do. This is something that we can learn together.
I think when it comes to shifting gender norms and gender rules and the expectations of different genders, I think people are slowly but surely starting to realize that these are made up, right? That all these norms are made up. And they're not necessarily benefiting us in the way that they might have benefited us in some, magical time in the past. And so we are starting to see people, quote unquote, breaking some of these norms or these social rules. Like we're seeing men slowly starting to take, parental leave. As a company, as Mark mentioned, we're seeing more company starting to engage in that conversation around men's mental health, a conversation that has been said, might not have happened a number of years ago. And we're also starting to see, more people not conforming to gender rules around the way that they dress, around the makeup that they wear, right? So we're starting to see a little bit of difference in quote unquote the workplace around the way that people express themselves. Now, at the same time, just because people are realizing that these rules are made up and they're starting to break these rules doesn't mean that it's safe for everyone to break these rules. So there's still a very, very large gap between the norms that people want to, challenge versus how safe it is for them to challenge. And, having experience in different industries, when you step into, a community-based organization, it looks very different than a corporate organization, right? So I think it's also important to recognize and take lessons from what are the industries where people are bending these rules more often, and what lessons can we take from these industries, so people feel more safe being themselves in every workplace, not just some.
I would add that Catalyst's own research about masculine workplace anxiety is a crucial lens to understand why it's not safe for a lot of people to challenge these brutal gender binary ideas about gender. The data which says that this workplace anxiety for men is this combative workplace culture is defined as colleagues maneuvering to show domination and power through traditionally masculine behavior. So this is men policing each other and bullying each other in the workplace. That well over 90% of men have experienced this in the workplace. So there's this the man box culture rules that I mentioned earlier. Those rules are problematic, but the real definition of man box culture is the policing and bullying of each other to conform to those. And we see it in this combative workplace culture research from Catalyst. 94% of men, in fact, indicated that there's some level of that in their workplace. And if it's high enough, those same men said that if they heard a sexist comment about a woman, they wouldn't speak up. So it's suppressing fire by traditional retrogressive masculine ideas that takes place in our workplaces. And men literally are hiding. They may even be supportive of some of the progressive ideas that challenging the gender binary is bringing into the workplace, but they're hiding. And this is the thing we're trying to break men out of. And as the progress that Dani has named is beginning to take hold, that fear of speaking up is becoming more and more possible to break through. It's becoming a thinner and thinner barrier, this retrogressive idea of masculinity. And what we need men to hear and do now is that you cannot remain silent any longer, because your own mental health, the mental health of your coworkers, of the people in your life, of your children, the well-being and future hope of everyone requires that we push through that decades of conditioning we've had to remain silent by the bullying men around us, and instead say, you know what? I'm sick of this. I'm sick and tired of being spoken for by people who are here to wage a war on women, to wage a war on LGBTQI people. I'm sick of being named as part of the problem because I'm silent. I'm going to start speaking up.
What can and should we be asking of or saying to women too in these settings to help them invite men in?
There's a fascinating data point that I read in the Harvard Business Review a while back, and it was a study which said that although women are grateful to men for providing support for equity and for women's advancement, both men and women view men who advocate for gender equity to be less effective leaders and less masculine. So all of us, men, women, non-binary people, all of us have work to do to sort of self-reflect about what we've internalized from a significant, generations-long, powerful indoctrination beginning in infancy for all of us about what male strength is, what leadership is. Because if we assign the definition of strength to masculine authority and masculine dominance, we're going to continue to create a culture which is catastrophic economically, environmentally, politically. But when we start to define male strength as including the full range, the full spectrum of human capacities, which we all have, which include things like caregiving, empathy, listening with curiosity, supporting others, and we at the same time, invite women to bring those aspects that are traditionally referred to as masculine, which is strength, leadership, toughness, playing through the pain. When everyone is invited to bring their full human capacities, we start to change things.
What can we do in a workplace setting where we're all trying to be human alongside each other, really to reframe the cause of gender equity and make sure that no employee, regardless of their gender, is left behind?
As women, we need to recognize that men have really high rates of mental health challenges, right? And especially when we talk about suicide rates, they're quite high. And so it's really up to us to create space where men can be vulnerable and ask for help, right? Unless we create the space, that space is not going to be created. And so, how can we do that? We need to ask the men around us, hey, how are you feeling from 1 to 10? How are you feeling today? What do you need? So, really intentionally invite men to be vulnerable, to let them know that they can be vulnerable around you without being judged. So I do think that there's a lot more that we can do to be there. And if, for example, men are more vulnerable around us, guess what? That creates a space where more of us can be vulnerable, where more of us can ask for support, where more of us are safer.
But the interesting thing about vulnerability, and men are afraid of that word. If I start to express or show things, the other men around me, which we know from Catalyst research, are waiting to jump on that and police this old school masculinity. But vulnerability means ultimately to reveal. And when we reveal, we tap into an incredible resource, because our resiliency, our success in the workplace, our capacity to live richer, fuller lives is co-created with other people. It is created in the relational space, right? The back and forth of relating and communicating. And this is why men face such mental health challenges and so many challenges in their careers, their relationships. This is why men are anxiety ridden, because we have cut ourselves off from that capacity we were born with, we had as young boys, to form rich, meaningful, joyful friendships and relationships. This is researched in depth by Niobe Way in her book, Deep Secrets, and her new book, Rebels with a Cause, that boys and men in early adolescence refer to their best friends as that they love them. They use the word love unashamedly in her research. And they also say, without my best friend, I would go crazy. And by late adolescence, these same boys are saying, well, I'm kind of backing off from that friendship. I don't see Mike that much anymore, my best friend. And when she dug into it, she found out that the culture of masculinity had beaten down their willingness to be known as someone who had a friendship and made them try to prove instead that they were not little kids, girly, or gay. And at that point in late adolescence, these boys' suicide rates become 4 times that of girls. So we have a culture of masculinity which breaks boys' connection and then dumps them into this bullying hierarchy where showing dominance is the only way they can validate their masculinity. Instead, when we show vulnerability, what we're basically saying is, hey, this is what's going on for me. This is what's going on in my life. This is who I am in genuine, authentic, in wide-ranging ways within the performance of gender. And if I may add one more thing here, when we talk about a gender binary, we're not just talking about how one performs our identity in public. We're talking about much wider, more nuanced ideas about how the gender binary impacts us in how we interact with our children, how we show and express affection, how we what spaces or rooms or bars or games we will walk into. And so this is a policing of men, which is so locked down, it's cutting us off from these relational opportunities to connect and grow and live richer, longer lives.
It really does feel, the more we talk about this and unpack it, that there is no real meaningful gender equity in the workplace without that happening externally outside of the workplace as well, right? So it's as simple and as complicated as that, I suppose.
I was just going to point out, Cigna did a study recently, and this all comes back to loneliness, disconnection, lack of community, but that I forget the number, 62% of people in the workplace feel lonely, which has a billions of dollars impact on productivity, which is the question becomes for us as human beings, why can't we have as rich and meaningful relationships in the workplace as we have in any other of our communities, in our churches, in our families? But why can't we create that level of authentically showing up so that we have that? We don't have a lonely experience of being in the workplace. We have a rich, connected experience, which actually makes going to work something that is joyful for us instead of this slow, plodding process which so many people experience work as being.
That ability to show up in our full humanity, and be who we truly are at work, we know it's not safe for everyone. It's also not, maybe not something that everybody wants to do. There might be parts of ourselves that we prefer to keep in our personal life. And I think that needs to be part of the discussion around this too. And, I invite you each to weigh in about that if you feel comfortable.
Some people need to be able to, talk about their lives, talk about their family, talk about their same-sex partners. Other people, to succeed, need privacy, right? So I think it's really about recognizing that individuality that each one of us has, and giving us that ability to come to work the way that makes us feel happiest, even if that means being private about some things.
I want to leave us with two things. One, if there's anything else that we didn't discuss and you really would love to be able to name and include here, how have you broken with tradition?
We need to ask more questions, right? We first need to ask who's here, right? So who's in our company? It's not just women, it's men, and there's non-binary people, there's two-spirit people, etc. So we need to ask that question. Then we need to ask, how are they feeling? So through those data-driven surveys, right, where we ask about employee satisfaction, we need to segment that data to make sure that we capture how different genders are feeling. After that, then we need to do research around where the gaps are and see what strategies can we enact to ensure that all genders are feeling included. For example, maybe it's about all gender washrooms. Maybe it's about ensuring that all gender washrooms. Maybe it's about ensuring that all the languages are neutral with our website, etc. And last but not least, you need to actually follow through with that research. And that takes resources, that takes people, but also that takes collaboration with people from those communities. And so, in short, how can we make sure that nobody gets left behind? Ask more questions, starting with who's here. Now, how do I break with tradition? Existing as openly as a trans person, right? We are, although we have existed for thousands of years, it's only in the recent years that we're starting to be seen in the workplace, that we're starting to feel safe enough to come out. And so I try to break by tradition by taking up space, by speaking up, and by trying to be as visible as possible to ensure that being trans in the workplace is no longer a thing that needs to be highlighted. And it's just a thing that is normal and widely accepted.
When I look around the world and I'm looking for resilient, smart, powerful leadership, and I see a person like you, to me, this choice that you've made to show up is the act of courage in the world that we all need to be doing as well. And whatever level we are at in terms of our gender identity, our ability to engage and challenge destructive or harmful behaviors around us, this is the choice that each of us is going to have to self-search and soul-search and figure out now, because we see the degree to which things could go either way right now in the world. Things could get better, get more equitable and more beautiful and more human, or they could go quite the other way. And I would say in closing that each and every one of us must step outside of our comfort zone and show the kind of courage that a lot of folks are publicly displaying right now at genuine, in a genuinely unsafe world still. So thank you for everyone who's listening to this conversation, and thank you, Dani, for joining us. It's been such a pleasure.
Wow, thank you both. For those thoughtful responses. Really, what we're hearing here is that being able to show up as our authentic self in the workplace is a gift. And it reminded me so much of what we talk about often here at Catalyst, which is what happens inside the workplace is really impacted by what happens outside of it. So thank you for this time together, for sharing yourselves with us, and for all this thoughtful conversation. We'll see you next time.
If you like what you heard today,
be sure to subscribe to our podcast wherever you listen, watch on YouTube, or find us on catalyst.org/podcast.